Therefore, it is now time for question period. The Leader of the Massachusetts Loyal Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Yesterday, 5 different MPPs asked the Premier if she had confidence in her Minister of Health. They asked whether the Premier would fire him or shuffle out the Minister of Health portfolio. Despite all the cuts, the Premier wouldn't answer the question. 5 times, and 5 times she avoided answering the question. So it's clear, if the Premier agrees with the cuts, she will keep him as Minister of Health. If she doesn't agree with the cuts, she will shuffle him out. Mr. Speaker, here is a crystal clear question. Will the Minister of Health still have his job as Minister of Health after? And, Mr. Speaker, does the Premier have confidence in him?
Thank you. I'm trying to deal with that side. The members will come to order, and I'm not going to tolerate that constantly. Premier?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have confidence in my Minister of Health. I have confidence in my Cabinet. I have confidence in my caucus, Mr. Speaker. I have confidence in this team. Mr. Speaker, we are in the process of building this province up, Mr. Speaker. We are making investments across the province in hospitals, in schools, in transit, in transportation, Mr. Speaker, in roads and bridges across the province. We are making investments, Mr. Speaker, in this province that are going to stand this province in good stead into the future, that are going to make us more prosperous. Our economy is growing. We're one of the leaders in the country, Mr. Speaker. We are leading this country with our diverse, strong economy. Do I have confidence on my Cabinet? Absolutely, Mr. Speaker.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Start the clock, please. Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Premier, well, it will be with extreme disappointment to Ontario nurses, physicians and patients that you stand by this embattled health minister. You know, I toured the Scarborough Hospital yesterday, and again I got to see—
I'm sorry. Stop the clock. I am now going to move to individuals, and I'm going to start with the member from Beaches, East York. And that's not helpful when I'm trying to get the other side to come to order. And that goes for everybody. I'm coming to every individual today. Please finish.
Mr. Speaker, touring the Scarborough Hospital, I was able to realize the negative effects of these Liberal cuts. You know who put it best, actually? Former Liberal MPP Bas Balkinson, who described the situation in Scarborough as not meeting the needs of modern medicine. And yet, the Scarborough Hospital wasn't on the government's past capital projects, not in their future plans. All the government does is fund more studies. The hospital staff feel they're not even on the radar with this government. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier put the hacksaw away and finally give the Scarborough Hospital the support they deserve?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You know, I know the Minister of Health and Long-Term Care is going to want to comment on the Scarborough issue, but, Mr. Speaker, I think it is really important to recognize that this is the leader of a party that has consistently voted against and opposed the investments that we are making in health care. $1 billion in our budget, Mr. Speaker. The leader of the opposition and their party voted against that and opposed those investments, Mr. Speaker. $345 million more for hospitals, new funding, Mr. Speaker. $12 billion, Mr. Speaker, to build and renovate hospitals around the province. $50 million, Mr. Speaker, a year to deal with maintenance and deferred maintenance issues, Mr. Speaker. All of those investments, the leader of the opposition has opposed. They have voted against. It's a bit rich, Mr. Speaker, for him to stand up and say that we need to invest more when they voted against every initiative.
please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, back to the Premier. I proudly opposed a budget that cut 1,400 nurses. I proudly opposed a budget that took $800 million from physicians to take away from patient care. But let's be very specific about the Scarborough Hospital. The operating rooms are the oldest in the province, created in 1956. The staff at the Scarborough Hospital told me they're half the size they're supposed to be, and to such an extent, they have to put the equipment in the operating room in the hallways. It is unacceptable for patient care. 7 years ago, the province did a study saying they unequivocally needed new operating rooms. You have sat on the news for 7 years that these operating rooms don't meet the standards of modern medicine. So my question, Mr. Speaker, is will you finally show the respect to the people of Scarborough by giving them the new operating rooms that your own studies show are needed?
Thank you. Be seated, please. Be seated, please. The member from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, come to order. Premier.
Long-term care.
Minister of Health, long-term care.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am so pleased that the opposition, the official opposition, has finally demonstrated some interest in Scarborough. I don't recall in the last 2 years a single health care question about Scarborough. I don't know if the timing is coincidental, but I was recently in Scarborough myself, Mr. Speaker, and I stood side by side with every MPP from Scarborough and from Durham as we announced the result of a one-year focus on health care in Scarborough, where we announced a $19 million contribution to Scarborough General Hospital for diagnostic imaging, where we announced a $5 million planning grant for both Durham and Scarborough regions so we could build new infrastructure, where we announced a $4.5 million increase in operating funds this year for Rouge Valley Hospital, $3 million in new funds for Scarborough Hospital, and $2.6 million more for Lakeridge, Mr. Speaker.
Seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. The Minister of Tourism, Culture and Sport will come to order. New question. The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. A couple of weeks ago, the Globe and Mail acquired a 57-page climate change action plan. The document was stamped Cabinet Confidential. Now, we all know about Cabinet Confidential, and it's an important part of our system, important principle of our parliamentary system. It is a serious breach of trust and ethics to leak Cabinet documents. Mr. Speaker, thanks to the Globe and Mail, we also know the Premier doesn't trust her own Cabinet. So, Mr. Speaker, my question is, does the Premier know which minister walked out of Cabinet with this confidential document?
Thank you. Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you know, I think that the Leader of the Opposition,
Member from Nepean Carleton,
really, like his former colleague in the Wild Rose in Alberta, really doesn't want to talk about climate change. Doesn't want to talk about the realities that we have to take this challenge on head-on, Mr. Speaker, that we must make change. We must tackle this, Mr. Speaker, because we have a responsibility as a jurisdiction in Canada, but as part of the globe. And so the changes that we're making, Mr. Speaker, the cap and trade, the climate change action plan that we're putting in place is going to drive innovation in this province. It's going to drive down greenhouse gas emissions, Mr. Speaker, and it's going to help Canada to meet its commitment in the global fight, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Premier, my question was actually about the Cabinet leak, but I'll ask another question. According to the Globe and Mail, the Premier believes some ministers are not pulling their weight. And to be honest, I happen to agree with the Premier. But Who exactly isn't pulling their weight? Is it the Minister of Children and Youth Services that took away IBI therapy from 5-year-old children with autism? Is it the Minister of Health who fired recklessly 1,400 nurses? Is it the Minister of Community and Social Services that has thrown away $292 million on computer systems that don't work? Mr. Speaker, can the Premier tell us exactly which minister she thinks isn't pulling their weight, and which one of them leaked the Cabinet document?
Thank you. The member from Eglinton Lawrence, come to order. The member from Eglinton Lawrence, second time. Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, once again, I would say to the Leader of the Opposition, I actually do understand why he would want to lower himself to make personal divisive attacks, because he cannot take on the challenge of talking about climate change.
The member from Prince Edward Hastings. Finish, please.
I have been crystal clear, Mr. Speaker, that we on this side of the House see it as our responsibility to tackle this threat that is probably the greatest threat that humanity has ever faced, Mr. Speaker. The fact that we have taken the largest initiative in North America by shutting down the coal-fired plants doesn't mean we can rest on our laurels, Mr. Speaker. It means that we have to move ahead, and we have to take initiative that leads the country and leads the globe in terms of developing innovation and technology to tackle the greenhouse gas emissions on this planet, Mr. Speaker.
Final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, back to the Premier. The personal and divisive comments that I was attributing are sourced to you, the Premier of Ontario, in the Globe and Mail. Let me add, Mr. Speaker, one other reference to the Premier's opinions. Liberal sources went on to tell the Globe that the Premier believes longer-serving members of Cabinet are not particularly effective communicators. Again, I happen to agree with the Premier. Just look at the Minister of Education and how she blew millions of dollars on pizza parties and hotel rooms. Or look at the Minister of Energy, who told us that the gas plant scandal was going to cost a cup of coffee. Let's not forget the Minister of Environment that told us that they were going to ban both nuclear and natural gas. Now, someone in this Cabinet leaked this ridiculous plan to ban natural gas. So, Mr. Speaker, instead of throwing one of these ministers under the bus, is the Premier going to take responsibility for this Cabinet leak and the ridiculous plan to ban natural gas?
You seated, please. You seated, please. Thank you. The member from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke, second time. Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the comments attributed to me about my team are false. I made it clear when I was in Alberta that we have no intention of banning natural gas, Mr. Speaker. And here's what we're going to do with the bus. We're going to make sure the bus is clean, Mr. Speaker. We're going to make sure that it's emissions-free, and we're going to make sure that we have a province that is a leader in fighting climate change, something that that party has opposed at every turn, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you. Stop. Order, please. Start the clock. Thank you. New question. The Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Premier. The Premier did not run on a platform to sell Hydro One. In fact, she stood in this House and said straight from her own lips that it was not for sale. And she promised at the same time, Speaker, that she was going to be open and transparent. 80% of the people of Ontario want to keep Hydro One public. and over 200 municipalities say the same thing. Not a single Ontarian voted for the sell-off of Hydro One, but today, for the very first time in the history of our province, private shareholders' meetings are happening across the street, Speaker, because this Premier broke her promise. Will the Premier do the right thing and stop selling off any further shares of Hydro One?
Be seated, please. Be seated, please.
Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I know that the Leader of the Third Party knows that I ran on a platform that was designed to invest in infrastructure across this province. And what that means, Mr. Speaker, is to build transit, build roads, bridges. And we talked about assets, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
A review of assets that was going to generate revenue to allow us to make those investments, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Third Party was clear about that because she started opposing it right from the get-go, because she opposed those investments in transit, Mr. Speaker. She opposed those investments in expanding the northern highways. She opposed those investments in hospitals and schools around the province, Mr. Speaker, because she fundamentally opposed the investments in infrastructure that are so desperately needed for this economy. That's what we ran on, Mr. Speaker, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Speaker, what I fundamentally oppose is a Premier who is not telling the truth to the people of this province around this. I withdraw. Speaker, I withdraw.
I'm going to ask the member to withdraw because you can't say indirectly what you can't say directly.
Actually withdraw, Speaker, and I do withdraw.
Speaker,
what I actually fundamentally oppose is a government that doesn't tell the people of the province their intention to sell off a revenue-generating asset that belongs to the people of this province. And what I also fundamentally oppose, Speaker, is a Premier who is not paying attention to what the Financial Accountability Officer of this province says, which is in fact the worst way to try to fund infrastructure is to sell off a revenue-generating asset in the province of Ontario. That's what I fundamentally oppose, Speaker. And my question is why this Premier is not standing up for what is best for the people of this province.
thank you. Seated, please. Thank you. Premier.
Mr. Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we've been clear all along that we want to maximize the value of assets owned by the people of Ontario to better produce value, to reinvest in new assets, to have even greater returns. And that's exactly what's happening. In fact, we now have a corporation that is more improved, more customer-focused. It has greater investments that's increased value for the shareholders, which are the people of Ontario right now, and it's unlocked billions of dollars needed.
Member from Hamilton East, Stony Creek, second time. Minister.
It's unlocked billions of dollars of needed capital to invest in infrastructure, which the member opposite has opposed. More importantly, the foregone revenue that the member talks about is in fact being made up by greater returns that's being had as a result of the investments that we make, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
Thank you. Final supplementary.
Speaker, selling off Hydro One will shoot the rates through the roof. It happens every time there is a privatization of hydro, regardless of where in the world it has happened. And it started with Mike Harris right here in the province of Ontario. And this Premier is finishing his job. It is bad for families. It is bad for businesses. It is bad for Ontario's bottom line, says the Financial Accountability Officer. The independent Financial Accountability Officer says it will actually cost us money, Speaker. It means a bigger deficit and less money for transit and infrastructure. The evidence is clear. The Liberal claims simply are not based in reality. They are nothing but Liberal Party spin. Will this Premier stop the sell-off before it is too late, Speaker?
Be seated, please. Be seated, please.
Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, talking about spin, the member opposite knows all too well the Ontario Energy Board actually sets the rates. It won't be Hydro One. She also knows that we're doing this in tranches to minimize the risk. Unlike what happened with the sale of 407, we still retain the largest ownership of Hydro One, a much more improved company, and the markets have indicated the fact that the reaction to the Hydro One process is making it more valuable, is providing even greater dividends to the province, and no one can have more than 10% ownership of Hydro One, which minimizes the very risk that the member is talking about. The majority of the province, the majority of the company is still owned by retail investors that are Ontarians, as well as the province of Ontario. It's better for the province. It's more money for infrastructure. It's better for our economy, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. New question, the Leader of the Third Party.
Thank you, Speaker. Back to the Premier, but I have to say our priority is people, not the market. It is people, Speaker, Ontarians want to know that when their loved...
Sorry. Order. Please carry on.
Thank you, Speaker. Ontarians want to know that when their loved ones need care, their hospital is safe and that it's been properly repaired, Speaker. The records show, the ones that New Democrats got, just how much repair work is needed at each hospital in Ontario. Collectively, it's over $3.2 billion, Speaker, of repair backlogs. But the government has censored which hospitals actually need the work. Will this Premier actually be open and transparent and show Ontarians the respect they deserve and release the complete list?
Thank you.
Minister of Health and Long-Term Care.
Minister of Health and Long-Term Care.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know what the Leader of the Third Party is suggesting. She wants to actually reveal in advance of any bidding process to potential contractors, to bidders. She wants to reveal what the hospital and the Ministry of Health and the government think is the cost of renovating or improving or maintaining a facility. To give that unfair advantage in a bidding process, which would enable those potential bidders to actually reflect what they believe that they can get, rather than the best price is what government should be looking for. But it's important to note as well that when we look at the issue of deferred maintenance, it doesn't simply represent a total of all the necessary repairs required to enable a hospital to deliver quality services. They represent the dollars that would be required to upgrade all hospitals in Ontario to brand new hospital status. Quotations, brand new hospital status, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Speaker, this has nothing to do with contractors. It happens to be to do with the rights of people to know what's happening in their local hospitals. Yesterday, the Minister of Health told reporters that hospitals with the greatest repair needs include entirely new builds. He apparently clarified this a little while later to say that some of this might be in places where hospitals may be actually replaced. But of course, the government isn't releasing the names of those hospitals, so the Liberals are asking Ontarians to just take their word for it. We don't know if a hospital that needs $200 million in maintenance is slated to be replaced in a year, in 20 years, or at all, Speaker. Until the government releases the facts, they're expecting Ontarians to just trust them. Will this Premier show Ontarians the respect that they deserve and release the complete list, Speaker?
Thank you. Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know that the Leader of the Third Party wants to completely disrupt, if not destroy, the competitive bidding process. It would be completely inappropriate, for example, for a new build as well, to actually provide a dollar value estimate from the government in terms of what we think that is required to build that new hospital or to renovate it. It's ludicrous, quite frankly, Mr. Speaker. But I'm proud of this government's record of past investment. We have 35 new or highly renovated hospital projects underway in the province right now as we speak, Mr. Speaker. We're investing $12 billion in new capital spends over the next 10 years, $100 million each and every year, just specifically for maintenance. And as I mentioned, for deferred maintenance, it would be the example of your house, of what it would cost to rebuild your house so it is in brand new status. That's a very different thing than what's required to provide quality health care.
That's right.
Final supplementary.
Speaker, more than $3.2 billion is needed to fix our hospitals just to keep them safe and prevent imminent breakdowns. That was what was reported in the FOI that we received from this minister's
Minister of Economic
staff in
Development,
his ministry. So he better read the FOI that we received. But according to the auditor, Ontario is falling behind each and every year when it comes to making those investments. In fact, the auditor said, and I quote, "In the last 5 years, hospitals spent on average $45 million of their operating funds that should be going to patient care on capital and other funding needs." And this is happening at the same time that the Liberals froze hospital operating budget, Speaker, for 4 straight years. When will this Premier cut the spin and this minister cut the spin and admit that the Liberals are failing to properly fund hospital repairs?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's precisely in response to our agreement with the Auditor General's report that we put substantial new funds into the budget that was recently approved. So I'm not sure what the leader of the third party is referring to and why they chose not to support a budget that agreed with the Auditor General, that invested more money, $12 billion in capital, doubling our maintenance, the deferred maintenance from $50 million a year to $100 million a year. We're making those investments, notwithstanding them voting against the budget. Yep. We responded to the Auditor General's report. We've responded to the needs that have been identified for us and on our behalf by the hospitals across the province. But it's important to recognize what deferred maintenance is. It's an estimation on a go-forward basis for a whole slew of activities that may need to be replaced in the coming years. We've got a plan to do that in an orderly, responsible fashion that maintains the quality of care.
Thank you. Question, the member from Nipissing.
Thank you, and good morning, Speaker. My question is for the Premier. This morning, the Financial Accountability Officer confirmed what we here already know. This government is neither open nor transparent. He said it is, quote, highly disappointing that instead of looking to maximize information disclosure, this government restricts disclosure. This, quote, impedes the ability of MPPs to perform their duties of holding this government to account. They have repeatedly missed reporting requirements under the Fiscal Transparency and Accountability Act since 2012. They cancelled the gas plant scandal hearings, removed legislature officer oversight on Hydro One, and regularly stonewalled the FAO and Auditor General from receiving necessary information.
Question. I
ask the Premier, are cabinet leaks and criminal investigations the only way we can ever get the real facts here?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, let me talk about the Financial Accountability Officer, and we have a real respect for this office. The member opposite knows that we worked.
Finish, please.
Mr. Speaker, ministries work closely with the FAO. The member opposite knows that we worked with the opposition parties, and we recognized during a minority parliament we worked together to establish the office of the FAO, Mr. Speaker. And both the legislation and the office of the Financial Accountability Officer were modelled after the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Mr. Speaker. That was the agreement and the discussion that we talked about with the opposition. It is the office and the parameters of his job, of that office, are modelled after the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Mr. Speaker. That is the work that we did together.
Member from Leeds-Grenville, second time. Supplementary.
Back to the Premier. The FAO told us there is, quote, a broader pattern of refusals for access to information. He also said the government's stonewalling has, quote, made it difficult to assess the plausibility of the government's financial projections and to evaluate risks that those projections would ever be met. He doesn't trust their numbers. Sure does. The FAO said the government is withholding documents and shocked us, Speaker, by saying, quote, I believe this is political direction. This is unbelievable. From backroom deals to stonewalling officers of the legislature, this government only does what's best for the Liberal Party. Sure. Speaker, will the Premier end this pattern of obstruction and give the FAO the necessary documents to do his job?
Minister of Finance.
Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I want to reiterate that we work very closely with the Financial Accountability Officer, the first of its kind in Canada for a province to undertake. Additionally,
Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we respect the work that the Financial Accountability Officer does for our province. It is why we put in place the opportunities to have more forward-thinking and review of the actions that we take. Additionally, we will be sending a government-wide directive to all offices to ensure that offices are responding to the FAO in a consistent and timely manner, Mr. Speaker. To be clear, requests for information from the FAO are responded by non-partisan officials. It's not by the political staff. And during the minority government, all parties work together to establish the FAO and the legislation that governs the office. We are working within those parameters. We'll continue to work collaboratively with the FAO on an ongoing basis, and we will provide the information that we're allowed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
New question, the member from Kitchener-Waterloo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Speaker, the NDP fought hard to ensure that this legislature and MPPs had a financial accountability officer here. New Democrats believe in independent oversight. When the legislation was written, no one expected the Premier and the Liberal government to deny the financial accountability officer the information he needs to do his job. This morning, the FAO called a news conference and he said, and I quote, "It is highly disappointing that instead of looking to maximize the information that the government can provide to MPPs and through them all Ontarians, the government is focusing on how it can restrict disclosure of information. Why is this Premier trying to undermine yet another independent watchdog?"
Mr. Speaker.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we value the work that the Financial Accountability Officer does. We are working collaboratively with them. We recognize the necessity for timely manner in which information is received. We also recognize a duty that we have in regards to confidentiality requirements in the work that we do. And I know the member opposite respects that, and if they don't, they should. But we will continue to work with the Financial Accountability Officer to provide the information necessary.
The member from Renfrew. The member from Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke is warned. You've got two.
We'll continue to work with the FAO as we always have.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have tried to undermine the Auditor General of this province. They have fought with the Ombudsman Office. Now they're refusing to give the Financial Accountability Officer the information that he needs to assess the financial impact of this government's decisions. Mr. Speaker, there is a pattern here. This government seems to have a problem with transparency and accountability and openness. As the FAO has said this morning, and I quote, "They are saying they're an open government, and I'm saying let's see the data to show that you're open." Now, the Premier talks a lot about openness and transparency. Will she be open with Ontario's independent, non-partisan Financial Accountability Officer, or will she continue to stonewall?
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with the FAO. I talk with him on an ongoing basis. My officials, even yesterday, met with the FAO because we recognize how important the work he does and must have information on a timely basis within the confines. In fact, the FAO recently said, and he said, "I respect the concept of cabinet confidentiality." Yes, they do need to have cabinet confidentiality. We do require some degree of confidentiality when we're putting forward some of the issues. We recognize as well that the FAO, as well as the Auditor General, requires information when it's available. And at this point in time, we will make everything available. A directive is being sent across the ministries to ensure that the officials, which are the non-partisan officials of this government, who does have ongoing relationship with the FAO, to provide the information that is required within the act that that member approved and supported, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. New question, the member from Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs. Yesterday, I was so proud to be in this room to hear the Premier apologize to survivors of residential schools for this dark chapter in our history and the lasting impacts it still has for Indigenous peoples. The Premier announced as part of her apology a new strategy to bring meaningful change to the lives of Indigenous people and the communities in the spirit of reconciliation called the Journey Together, Ontario's action plan for reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Can the minister please tell us more about this action plan and tell us why it is so important for our relationship with Indigenous peoples in Ontario?
Minister of Aboriginal Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for that very important question. Since the release of the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission last December, the Ministry of Aboriginal Affairs has been working across ministries to prepare Ontario's response to this document. It is a whole-of-government response. We are taking action on the recommendations. It is a priority for this government. I am very pleased to reiterate that commitment with yesterday's announcement of the document, The Journey Together. This is another step on the path to reconciliation, but it is not the end of the journey. There is much work to be done to do together with our Indigenous partners and all Ontarians to make meaningful change and genuine reconciliation a reality. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is wonderful to hear that the government is honouring the commitments it has made to address the legacy of residential schools and work with Indigenous partners to develop a new path forwards towards reconciliation. I know that taking action on the recommendations contained in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report is a priority for the Ontario government and that we are committed towards achieving true reconciliation. I understand that the action plan builds on positive first steps already taken by our government to strengthen the partnerships based on mutual respect and shared benefits. Could the minister please tell us more about the steps our government will take to bring real change to the lives of Indigenous peoples and communities?
Question. Thank you. Minister.
Good question.
Speaker, the Journey Together, Ontario's commitment to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, is aimed at improving social, economic and health outcomes through 5 broad themes. The themes are: 1. Understanding the legacy of residential schools; 2. Closing the gaps and removing the barriers; 3. Creating a culturally relevant and responsive justice system; 4. Supporting Indigenous culture; and 5. Reconciling relations with Indigenous peoples. Ontario plans to invest $253 million over the next 3 years on programs and actions guided by these 5 themes, which are in turn a response to the 94 recommendations of the TRC report. Shaped by the document The Journey Together, Ontario, along with Indigenous partners and the federal government, will work to achieve measurable change for Indigenous communities. It's long required.
Thank you. New question, the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Ontario is a vibrant province with a rich and diverse culture. Our pluralism makes us stronger. Freedom of religion is fundamental to the freedom we love and enjoy in Canada. In Sikhism, the wearing of the turban is an essential symbol of identity of the members of the Sikh faith. And now it's time for a motorcycle helmet exemption for Sikh riders like the one that exists in British Columbia, Manitoba and the United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier commit to amending the Highway Traffic Act to accommodate the rights of Sikhs to display their faith?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with the member opposite, and our government recognizes the importance of preserving the fundamental right of religious expression, Mr. Speaker. Absolutely. We have to strike the right balance between public safety and religious accommodation. It is absolutely critical, Mr. Speaker. We're very proud of our record of road safety in Ontario. We consistently rank among the safest roads in North America, Mr. Speaker. In Ontario crash data, we know that riders without helmets involved in a collision had a 17% greater risk of being killed or seriously injured. 17%.
Order,
Mr.
please.
Speaker, I will say to the heckler opposite, I have never said that this is something that we would do. There are people in this room who know that I said, and my caucus knows that I said that we would look at it, we would look for the evidence, Mr. Speaker, and the evidence points to safety requiring a helmet on motorcycles, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Premier, standing up for freedom of religion shouldn't be something you only do at the Kelsa Day Parade or before an election. It is something that you should do each and every day. Members of the community, some who are present here today, feel betrayed by the Premier. Order. They feel that she went back on her promise. And it's not just the Premier going back on her promise, it's every member of your caucus in Peel. So I will try again. Will you honour your promise? Will you honour the promise that the members of your government made? Will you do the right thing and support the member from Prince Edward Hastings and his bill to amend the Highway Traffic Act to accommodate members of the Sikh faith?
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Premier.
I have struggled with this issue. I struggled with this issue when I was the Minister of Transportation, and I have struggled with this issue as Premier.
Order.
I understand the politics that the Leader of the Opposition is playing, Mr. Speaker, but he is perpetrating a falsehood. I never, ever...
Oh, no, I asked. Withdraw. Thank you.
I have never said that we would take this move. And, Mr. Speaker, when we know that wearing helmets mean that injury rates go down 75%, Mr. Speaker, I will not be the Premier who stands in front of a mother whose son has been killed because he was not wearing a helmet. I will not be that Premier, Mr. Speaker. I am going to make sure that we do everything we can to keep the roads in Ontario safe.
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. New question. Order. New question. The member from Kenora-Rainy River.
Thank you, Speaker. To the Premier. In April, Azrea Coco-Panes, a 14-year-old girl and member of the Grassy Narrows First Nation, walked away from the Lake of the Woods Hospital in Kenora, and she was found dead 2 days later. There's a lot we don't know about what happened to Azrea. Why did the police drop her off at the hospital? Why did she walk away? But what we do know from her father is that Azrea needed help. Azrea was involved in the child welfare system and under the care of the hospital when she went missing. Speaker, will the Premier commit to bring the Coco-Panes family and her community of Grassy Narrows some peace and back their call for a coroner's inquest?
Minister of Children and Youth Services.
Minister of Children and Youth Services.
Thank you, Speaker. And I want to thank the member for this important question. And whenever a child in the welfare system or outside of it is devastatingly impacted, as described here, we are all deeply concerned. And Speaker, we know there's more work to do in the child welfare system, and we're working very hard with our Indigenous partners for reforming that system and supporting culturally appropriate services and programs to those communities, and quite frankly, Speaker, looking at the broader system as well to make sure that children in care are front and centre, and that those children's best interests are always put first and foremost. So we work very closely with our Indigenous partners on child welfare reform when it comes to those communities, and we'll continue that work with them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Parliamentary.
Thank you, Speaker. To be clear, these services don't exist. They don't even exist in Kenora, where families are told that they have to travel 500 kilometres to Thunder Bay to access some of these very basic mental health services for youth. Speaker, yesterday's announcement of the Truth and Reconciliation process was a moment when government recognized the need to listen, to be humble, to acknowledge the powerful legacy of our relationship with First Nations. But we need to do more than just acknowledge. We need action on this mental health crisis resulting from this legacy for First Nations, especially for young people. A coroner's inquest is required here. What response does the Premier have to Azrea's family and for the community of Grassy Narrows, which is already reeling from environmental devastation? And what action is the Premier prepared to take?
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Speaker. And yesterday was indeed a very important day. In fact, I held a third roundtable with our Métis, Onwa and family friendship centres to develop the work further on our soon-to-be renamed Indigenous Child and Youth Strategy, and a big part of that is making sure we have the right mental health supports for Indigenous children, both from a prevention point of view as well as when children in those communities enter care. Speaker, the Minister of Health has announced additional funding to support the mental health and addiction strategy, and we recognize that additional supports are always required, and we've supported training for Aboriginal mental health and addiction workers with annual funding of $3 million. Is there more to do? Yes, and I'm happy to talk one-on-one with this member about this particular.
New question. Member from Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Attorney General. Our government is committed to ending chronic homelessness in 10 years. We're also delivering on our priority of targeting youth homelessness. We know that LGBTQ two-spirited youth experience far higher rates of homelessness than other young people. These grim statistics reflect the toll that homophobia and transphobia take on our youth. They face violence and harassment in our schools, within families, and other communities. They have rejection of their sexual identity, which is integral to who they are. Mr. Speaker, could the minister please tell us what this government is doing to help support LGBTQ two-spirited youth in Ontario?
Thank you. Attorney General.
Oui, merci, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member from Kitchener Centre for an important question. Every young person, Mr. Speaker, as they grow and develop, needs a supportive home and a caring adult to help them reach their full potential. Just this morning, the Premier announced that our government is supporting the outreach program, a mental health support crisis centre for LGBTQ youth runs by Equal Canada Human Rights Trust. We are providing up to $1.5 million in funding for this drop-in crisis centre over 3 years. It gives young people who are homeless or at risk of becoming homeless an array of crucial services. Too often, our community's youth avoid seeking help because of encounters with homophobia and transphobia and at other institutions.
Answer.
Equal offer them an accepting and welcoming place to get the kind of help that can make a profound difference in their life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the Minister for her answer and for her attention and her commitment to this very important issue. We know that this Mental Health Support Crisis Centre offers an accepting and welcoming place to get the kind of help that makes a profound difference in a young person's life. Now, on Wednesday, the Premier is going to be attending the Pride flag raising at Queen's Park. This is a very important symbol of Ontario's commitment to equality. Minister, despite how far we have come over the past few decades, we still have a very long way to go. For example, Ontario's current law on who can form a family is outdated, as it does not reflect present realities. Minister, can you please tell this House what you are doing to ensure that Ontario's laws do reflect acceptance for all families?
Thank you. Attorney General.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, first let me thank the member from Parkdale I Park for bringing forward a private member bill that would modernize our legislation. We are committed, as I said last week, to fixing this. As the Premier said this morning, she asked me to bring forward legislation in September that would, if passed, ensure that all parents are clearly recognized in Ontario, whether they be gay or straight, and whether their children are conceived with or without assistance. So this legislation, the Premier asked me to work with the member from Parkdale I Park and stakeholders to craft a bill based on the work that has already been done by the Uniform Law Conference of Canada. The conference consulted with province stakeholders and legal experts in preparing its guidance. It provides a solid starting point for an Ontario bill, and British Columbia and Alberta are already have this bill in place. So, Mr. Speaker, because we would like to see the definition change in Ontario by the end of this year.
Thank you. New question, the member from Dufferin-Caledon.
My question is to the Minister of Children and Youth. Minister, let me share the story of Chelsea and her son, Charlie. On May 4th, Charlie was told he was being terminated from IBI therapy as of September, just in time for Charlie to go to school. Problem is, Minister, Charlie isn't ready for school. He hasn't achieved half of his developmental goals. So Charlie is expected to go to school in September without the tools he needs to succeed. Charlie is being set up to fail. It's not right, and it's not fair. I will ask the Minister again, will she reverse her decision and allow children like Charlie to continue receiving IBI therapy until he has met his developmental goals?
Thank you. Minister of Children and Youth Services.
Thank you, Speaker, and I want to thank my critic for the question as well. It's important to remember for children who are in IBI therapy currently, they will continue in IBI therapy until their next assessment. And I think there's a myth out there, Speaker, a myth that needs to be clarified, that these children, after a clinical assessment, are not automatically dropped. They will be assessed, and their future treatment will be recommended by a clinician, and a transition plan will be established. It's important to remember, too, Speaker, that IBI and ABA are essentially the same thing. The difference is, Speaker, intensity of the service.
Answer.
What we're moving to, Speaker, is a system that moves away from extreme choices.
Thank you.
And we are building a model.
Thank you. Member from Dufferin-Caledon, come to order. Supplementary.
It is very frustrating, Speaker. The message is not getting through. This is not a myth. From Chelsea's email, and I quote, "My son Charlie was terminated from IBI at his 6-month progress service. He is not ready for school. Charlie has waited 2 years to start IBI therapy, only to be told he's out in September. No appeal, no transition, no direct funding option. I will ask again, on behalf of the children like Charlie and the thousands of kids in Ontario with ASD, will the minister reverse her decision to remove IBI therapy for kids over 5 until she has a coordinated provincial autism strategy in place?
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Thank you. Minister.
Speaker, my commitment to families and these children is that they will have a personalized plan of care that is responsive to their needs and to their changing circumstances. Speaker, families have asked us for this, and providers have been asking for this. Experts have said this. That's exactly why we're doing this, Speaker. And I'm very pleased to say, Speaker, that we're working very closely with
the member from Hamilton Mountain, come to order.
When it comes to the Connections program to ensure smooth transitions well before a child goes into the school system and while they start in the school system. I'm also very pleased to report, Speaker, that as of this point, over 434 families have met with their service provider. That just happened in a week, Speaker. Speaker. Over half of the involved families have had their first meeting. Some are taking second meetings. We're monitoring these situations case by case with the families. We're listening to what the families are saying, and we're taking.
Thank you. The member from Dufferin-Caledon, second time. The member from Hamilton Mountain, second time. And the member from Leeds-Grenville is warned. New question. The member from Nickel Belt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier.
Speaker, yesterday, the day we apologized to our First Nation people, the Premier said that she did not know the source and had not read the report into the cleanup option for the mercury poisoning the First Nations people of Grassy Narrows. Well, maybe I can help, Speaker. It is the government-appointed working group, and I don't know why no one in the government has read it, because they got the report back in April. So it is disappointing to hear, in response to the report yesterday, the Ministry of the Environment said, and I quote, "Currently, there is no evidence to suggest that mercury levels in the river system are such that any remediation beyond continuing natural sedimentation remediation would be warranted." Does the Premier think that this is an acceptable response to the First Nations people of Grassy Narrows?
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. And I actually have now read the recommendations of the report, Mr. Speaker. And from those recommendations, it's not very clear exactly what the solution is. If the member opposite looks through the recommendation, she will see that the first recommendation starts with putting in place some field studies, Mr. Speaker, to determine whether there is mercury still leaking, Mr. Speaker, and to determine whether capping or whether dredging or whether some other solution would be the answer, Mr. Speaker. So I said yesterday I had not read the report. The report has been read, Mr. Speaker, in government. I have now looked at the recommendations, and I certainly will be talking with the Minister of the Environment to see if that recommendation around field studies, if that's something that we can do. But I rest assured, Mr. Speaker, there is no clear direction in that report that points to a simple solution. It is a complex issue. There may be some solutions that have arisen in the last few years, Mr. Speaker, but there is no one solution that's going to solve the mercury problem at Grassy Narrows.
Thank you. Supplementary.
Thank you, Speaker. Well, the report says that remediation can be enhanced by applying a layer of clay to the source of the sediments, very much like we have done in my riding with similar problem. It is safe, it is cheap, and it is an effective method. Leaders at Grassy Narrows First Nations travel, again, the 1,700 kilometres to come to Queen's Park to plead with this government to act to clean up the river that is poisoning them. 2 years ago, Chief Steve Forbesser had to starve himself on the lawn of Queen's Park to get a meeting with this government, and it took a Japanese research team to fly around the world to get that research restarted. So, Speaker, my questions for the good people of Grassy Narrow is simple. When will the Premier clean up the mercury contamination in Wabigoon River and Clay Lake?
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, and you know,
Be seated, please. Be seated, please. Premier.
Speaker, I have sat in the community hall at Grassy Narrows. I have heard from residents who have been affected, some of whom have gotten compensation, others from surrounding communities have not, and the discussion that was referenced in terms of the Japanese expert and the issues around Minamata disease, Mr. Speaker, I have heard those concerns. I have also heard from scientists, Mr. Speaker, who have differing views about how that water can be cleaned up and how the mercury can be dealt with, Mr. Speaker. As I said, the report that I have now seen, that I have looked at, Mr. Speaker, suggests that there is a need for some field studies to look at what the possibilities might be, Mr. Speaker.
Answer.
You know, the member opposite can pick one solution. There are partial solutions. The report says that there are certain sections of the river starting downstream that might be dealt with.
Thank you.
We're going to look at that report, Mr. Speaker, and make a decision.
Thank you. New question. The member from Glengarry, Prescott Russell.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. And Speaker, this question is in good taste. Speaker, summer weather has arrived, and barbecue season has arrived. And Speaker, my mouth waters when I speak of all the folks across the province that will be grilling seasoned steaks, barbecuing steaks, and beef hamburgers. And they're going to be topped off, Speaker, with Ontario tomatoes, lettuce, and French's ketchup. I was excited to hear how important beef farming is in Ontario. Cattle farming in our great province generates almost $9 billion in retail sales every year. But, Mr. Speaker, with beef from other provinces and countries sold in our grocery stores, can the minister explain how the government is supporting Ontario's beef farmers to help ensure that they remain competitive?
Thank you. Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs.
Very good question. Mr. Speaker, I want to really thank the member from Glengarry Prescott Russell for that very meaty question this morning. Mr. Speaker, remember the famous Wendy's commercial when Dave Thomas was there? The little old lady came up and said, "Where's the beef?" The beef will be out front of Queen's Park, corn-fed beef. I recommend everybody get out there and sample the very best beef that Ontario has to offer. As the members indicated, beef is a very important part of Ontario's agri-food sector, responsible for 9,500 jobs in primary production and another 9,000 jobs in processing. Last year, 7 days a week, Ontario exported 58 million kilograms of chilled and frozen beef worth $355 million. This government, from the Made in Ontario Risk Management Program to cross-sharing under Growing Forward 2, farmers can access a range of programs to support sustainable growth. Today, Mr. Speaker, I want to focus on a program unique to beef farming in Ontario, the Feeder Cattle Loan Program, and I'll talk about it.
Yes, you will. Supplementary.
Very much, Speaker, and thank you to the hard-working and articulate Minister of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs for that response. And it's good to know that our government is ensuring that beef farmers have access to a wide range of programs that will support the growth and help new farmers get started. By working together, Speaker, Ontario can support a thriving cattle industry across the province. Since being established, the Feeder Cattle Loan Guarantee Program has supported nearly $1.53 billion in direct economic activity. And there's also, Speaker, never once has there been a claim against the government's guarantee in the history of the program. So in order to improve the program, the beef farmers of Ontario have been asking the government to increase the maximum individual loan limits under the Feeder Cattle Loan Guarantee Program and increase the loan guarantee. Can the hard-working minister elaborate on the improvements that the government is making to the Feeder Cattle Loan Program?
Thank you, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say that the member from Glengarry Prescott Russell is supplementary. That was a sizzling supplementary. Mr. Speaker, this morning, I had the great honour of working with our industry. At 7 a.m., we made the announcement that effective immediately in the province of Ontario, we are doubling the cap on the Feeder Cattle Program.
That's quick action.
That is, Mr. Speaker, the program is going from $130 million to $260 million per year. This, along with changes that we made last year to double the individual lending limits, will allow more farmers access to competitive interest rates and new farmers to get into this exciting industry. We're also making changes to make it access for people to get access to our loan program. Mr. Speaker, this government stands with the farmers of the province of Ontario.
Question, the member from Wellington.
Speaker, my question is for the Attorney General. As the Attorney General knows, we've been working with local municipal officials, including Regional Chair Gary Carr, lawyers, and Halton area MPPs, to push for a new Halton courthouse. A new courthouse in Halton is urgently needed. The existing facility in Milton is aging, overcrowded, and completely inadequate in terms of security and privacy. Questions have even been raised about access to justice. When I raised this issue in question period in March of 2015, the Attorney General assured us that a new Halton courthouse was a priority. That was 14 months ago. Can the Attorney General update the House on the status of the planning process, which surely should be underway, for a new Halton courthouse, and what specific steps that she has taken to move this project forward?
Thank you. Attorney General.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker.
For his question. Yes, the Milton Courthouse is still our #1 priority in our ministry, and we recognize that the Milton Courthouse has many deficits. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I hear it from my side, from Burlington, the representative, the MPP from Burlington, Alton, Mississauga, Streetville, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Labour. They're all, I think I will need security pretty soon, because I hear it. It's a priority. We're working on it. My ministry is already on the Milton Courthouse. I visited the Milton Courthouse. I know the situation, and we will keep you posted on the progress of this file. Thank you very much.
Government House Leader on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I would remiss to recognize three very important guests who was in the Assembly with us. I want to recognize Joyce Craigo, who's an artist behind the exhibit Because It's 2016 and lives in my community of Ottawa Centre. Also with her was Councillor Catherine McKenney, who represents the Somerset Ward in the community of Ottawa Centre, along with her daughter Kenny. I welcome them to Queen's Park.
Thank you. I am going to say that that's not a point of order, and as a result of yesterday and some reflection of mine, we have set aside time to introduce people. If they're not in the House at that time, I would ask you to introduce them anyway. This is going to become a problem for us that we keep expanding the times in which we use, and we're right now in between the middle of a vote. So I'm going to ask all members to be sensitive to the fact that these after-the-fact things are happening, and we should improve it. The member from Prince Edward Hastings on a point of order.
Two guests that I was remiss in.
That's not a point of order. And I'm going to be insistent on that, people. We have a deferred vote on government notice of motion number 74, as amended related to arranging proceedings of Bill 201, Act to amend the Election Finances Act and the Taxation Act 2007. Call in the members. This will be a 5-minute bell. Would all members please take their seats? All members? On May 30th, Mr. Naqvi moved government notice of motion number 74, which was amended to read as follows. Now that, notwithstanding any standing order, dispense? Dispense. All those in favour of the motion, please, as amended, please rise one at a time, be recognized by the clerk.
Mr. Naqvi.
Mr. Naqvi.
Mr. Bradley.
Mr. Bradley.
Madame Mayor.
Madame Mayor.
Mr. Sousa.
Mr. Sousa.
Ms. Wynne.
Ms. Wynne.
Ms. Matthews.
Ms. Matthews.
Mr. Hoskins.
Mr. Hoskins.
Ms. Sandals.
Ms. Sandals.
Mr. Duguid.
Mr. Duguid.
Ms. McCharles.
Ms. McCharles.
Mr. Cole.
Mr. Cole.
Mr. Takar.
Mr. Takar.
Mr. Delaney.
Mr. Delaney.
Mr. Dillon.
Mr. Dillon.
Mr. Orzetti.
Mr. Orzetti.
Mr. McMeekin.
Mr. McMeekin.
Mr. Chan.
Mr. Chan.
Mr. Moridi.
Mr. Moridi.
Mr. Coteau.
Mr. Coteau.
Mr. Leal.
Mr. Leal.
Mr. Flynn.
Mr. Flynn.
Mr. Zimmer.
Mr. Zimmer.
Madame Lalonde.
Madame Lalonde.
Mr. Quadri.
Mr. Quadri.
Ms. Albanese.
Ms. Albanese.
Mr. Dixon.
Mr. Dixon.
Ms. Mangat.
Ms. Mangat.
Mr. Crack.
Mr. Crack.
Ms. Wong.
Ms. Wong.
Ms. Hunter.
Ms. Hunter.
Mr. Sergio.
Mr. Sergio.
Mr. Morrow.
Mr. Morrow.
Ms. Jassy.
Ms. Jassy.
Mr. Del Duca.
Mr. Del Duca.
Ms. Domerla.
Ms. Domerla.
Mr. Fraser.
Mr. Fraser.
Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Baker.
Mr. Baker.
Mr. Ballard.
Mr. Ballard.
Mr. Dong.
Mr. Dong.
Ms. Hogarth.
Ms. Hogarth.
Ms. Koala.
Ms. Koala.
Ms. Molly.
Ms. Molly.
Mrs. Martin.
Mrs. Martin.
Mrs. McGarry.
Mrs. McGarry.
Mrs. McMahon.
Mrs. McMahon.
Ms. Naidu-Harris.
Ms. Naidu-Harris.
Mr. Potts.
Mr. Potts.
Mr. Rinaldi.
Mr. Rinaldi.
Ms. Verneal.
Ms. Verneal.
Mr. Tebow.
Mr. Tebow.
Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Wilson.
Mr. Arnott.
Mr. Arnott.
Mr. Hardiman.
Mr. Hardiman.
Ms. McLeod.
Ms. McLeod.
Ms. Jones.
Ms. Jones.
Mr. Clark.
Mr. Clark.
Mr. Yakubuski.
Mr. Yakubuski.
Mr. Miller, Perry Sound, Muskoka.
Mr. Miller, Perry Sound, Muskoka.
Ms. Scott.
Ms. Scott.
Mr. Barrett.
Mr. Barrett.
Mrs. Monroe.
Mrs. Monroe.
Mr. Urick.
Mr. Urick.
Mr. Hudak.
Mr. Hudak.
Mr. Bailey.
Mr. Bailey.
Mr. Walker.
Mr. Walker.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Smith.
Mr. Harris.
Mr. Harris.
Mr. Nichols.
Mr. Nichols.
Ms. Marteau.
Ms. Marteau.
Mr. Coe.
Mr. Coe.
All those opposed, please rise one at a time, be recognized by the clerk.
Mr. Bisson.
Mr. Bisson.
Mr. Singh.
Mr. Singh.
Ms. Horvath.
Ms. Horvath.
Mr. Vantoff.
Mr. Vantoff.
Mr. Tabbins.
Mr. Tabbins.
Mr. Miller, Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Mr. Miller, Hamilton East, Stony Creek.
Ms. Taylor.
Ms. Taylor.
Mr. Natashak.
Mr. Natashak.
Ms. Armstrong.
Ms. Armstrong.
Madame Jalina.
Madame Jalina.
Ms. Fife.
Ms. Fife.
Ms. Campbell.
Ms. Campbell.
Mr. Montauk.
Mr. Montauk.
Mr. Hatfield.
Mr. Hatfield.
Ms. Gretzky.
Ms. Gretzky.
Mr. Gates.
Mr. Gates.
Ms. French.
Ms. French.
Ms. Sattler.
Ms. Sattler. The ayes are 71, the nays are 18.
The ayes being 71, the nays being 18, I declare the motion carried as amended. Carried. There are no further deferred votes. This House stands recessed until 3 p.m. this afternoon.